So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question, guys. This has been such a powerful conversation thus far. I do not want it to end. So this next one is actually on felony disenfranchisement. All right. All right. So according to the 2022 Sentencing Project Locked Out report, approximately 4.6 Americans are disenfranchised due to a felony conviction. This is four times as many people since the start of mass incarceration in 1973, with over 2 million voting eligible Black and Latin Americans blocked from participating. So, what should the formerly incarcerated do to confirm their voting eligibility? And what should states do, if anything, to empower those individuals seeking to become civically engaged? And I'll go ahead and kick that question off to our law professor, Dr. Wilson.
I mean, a couple of states, and Andrea can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe maybe it was Utah, or ironically, or maybe Idaho and Colorado. Have gone back and looked at their version of the 13th Amendment. If those of you have watched the documentary 13th, you know this, and if you haven't, you should right now. Basically, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except for the commission of a crime. And it's important to remember slavery here, not just as chattel slavery, about people being enslaved, but what we're talking about is the blockade between property and citizenship, right? And so until and unless you've committed a crime, you're allowed to begin the process of citizenship and voting. And so when we think about mass incarceration, we have to go back to the peonage and convict leasing laws. So after, of course, slavery ends for some people. We know the last enslaved person was actually freed in 1960, which is a whole nother conversation to have. Folks were essentially arrested for things like sitting still on a door stoop. They were arrested for walking aimlessly. They were arrested for not having a job in the time when white people wouldn't pay you to work. So there were all these ways folks were criminalized and then put on chain gangs in prisons, right, to work for free and to kind of enrich different corporations that we now know are very, very huge today. And part of that, and I'll get to the question quickly in a moment, part of that is, remember, when it comes to voting, a lot of these prisons are based in rural white areas. So when you think about how the census works in the Three-Fifths Compromise, essentially areas that had slavery before the Constitution was really ratified were able to count enslaved people that were there held under bondage as voting folks. And it gave them more representation in Congress. That law did not change after slavery ended. So prisons took the place of the plantation. Right. So the more people you have locked up in your area, the more money you're able to get, because the money is per head, not per citizen or per voting person. So folks that are incarcerated for the sake of the Constitution, for the sake of the Electoral College, for the sake of the census, count as money and voting power to that state. So their voting power in the House and Senate changes. Well, the House rather changes. So I say all to say is, what we really have to do is abolish the slavery and non-citizenship loophole in the 13th Amendment, right? And also what we should be doing, not just for incarcerated, but for everyone, is to acknowledge that once someone has, on the most moderate level, the easy level, served whatever time they have, like the voters in Florida decided, they should be able to vote immediately. I would argue, like Maine and Vermont have, that even when someone's incarcerated or has committed a crime, they don't lose citizenship. They do not lose the ability to have a say in the nation. Because as we know, for Black and Latino, and particularly Black and Indigenous people, your arrest rates have nothing to do with your innocence or guilt, right? Court is about the truth of the matter asserted based on the evidence that's allowed. And most evidence is not allowed in the court. So court is about proof and not truth. So I think for those of us that are aligned with abolition, for those of us that are aligned with democracy, if you don't believe in abolition, maybe you believe in put people in jail and throw away the key. If we believe in democracy, the reality is we need to hear every voice. And we're not able to lift every voice until a felony or a misdemeanor is no longer a blockade as having standing and being seen by the eyes of justice in this country. So number one, your incarceration status should be irrelevant to whether or not you can cast a vote, because you're still impacted by the laws, whether you're on death row or whether you have a misdemeanor for a traffic violation. And number two, if we don't allow this kind of blockade between the criminal justice system and your civil rights, then we should have an automatic resumption of any type of political voting power or the ability to run for office in this nation. So we really have to begin to kind of think about it and retrace, how do so many of these blockades actually trace back to slavery, or trace back to what happened to Native Americans with the Trail of Tears and also these forced removal boarding schools. So the first thing, reform the 13th Amendment, both at the federal level, both and at the state level. And then, of course, have an automatic resumption of rights if we don't have a blockade between civil rights and criminality at the state level as well.
I agree with so many things that were just said. It was one of the most complete answers they possibly have to this question. I think that and here's some good news, because I feel like it's always on voting rights important to celebrate the wins. We recently saw Minnesota pass rights restoration law that affects restoring rights to about 55,000 people in Minnesota. So that's super exciting. A lot of people in a lot of states are taking a look at these laws now. And I think, again, there's opportunity to push here and to really make sure that we can restore the rights of so many. I think that again, all of this is taken within the context of this death by 1,000 paper cuts scenario where you're really looking at what are the laws in every state, and then what are the laws nationwide, and who does it all serve and why. And so this is a direct effort to reshape the electorate. It's people know that arrest rates are higher in minority populations. They know that rates are high, conviction rates are higher, and people who are in lower socioeconomic classes who can't afford some of the representation, who can't afford private representation, all sorts of different things. So this is really an effort to reshape electorate. And famously in Florida, right, what did we see after we saw rights restoration? We saw a government that then tried to push back and scare people out of going ahead and then exercising their vote. So I think that this is something that we have to fight state by state. Let's celebrate the wins. Let's know it's possible, and that we can do it when we all join together to make sure that really great policy is passed in places. And at the same time, when we know the historic roots and causes that were so beautifully just outlined for us, we also understand exactly what we're up against and why it's so important for us to all stay together as we fight for restoration for so many citizens across the country.
But it's important to remember that the reform that Andrea just brought up, right, one with 62% of the vote, 13 points higher than the governor won 2 years before. And then he creates a Jim Crow government that creates an election police force, right, to go out and arrest 84-year-old Black women who believed they had the right to vote in the law, which the courts have said they did. And now they're charged with felonies. Senior citizens, folks that actually, right, marched in the 50s and 60s are now in prison for marching now. So I just want to accent that, because the voter participation dropped off between that midterm election for that constitutional amendment and then who voted for governor. So the next time around, and this person gets a 17-point win in re-election, and they're able to do this particular type of work and further it. So it's not good enough to vote and win a constitutional amendment if the folks in power or who are reelected into power are able to concentrate this power because we didn't show up again. Voting is a marathon, and we got to keep at it, particularly when you win, because that's when it gets harder, when you pass off that baton.
That's right.
I think this is where intersections are important to remember too, because in a broader sense, I would say that our culture is broken. Because yes, we live in a prison state where quite literally anyone is likely at any given time violating a law that they're not even aware of. And you're just waiting for the police to come by and grab you for something. But we also have a knee-jerk reaction to look at anyone who has violated the laws or otherwise has earned like a felon status in the worst possible light. And it becomes very easy to justify stripping them of their right to vote and other things when we're looking at them as not even human anymore. So we have a cultural issue that we need to also be working on passively in the background, and how it's influenced by other issues that may feel completely unrelated to this one. as a trans person, as an openly trans person, every day it seems like there are more states in the union who are trying to find ways to criminalize my community from existing in public. And in the process of doing that, they're creating pitfalls for us to trip into, and then inevitably one day potentially lose our right to vote, which strips us of the ability to ensure that we remain free and equal in this nation. It's not an accident. It's very deliberate. And a lot of the time I feel as though people don't realize it because it's so deeply ingrained in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the topic of, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I guess on the topic around this, I think, ways to like help spread empathy and compassion to also rehumanize people, from incarcerated backgrounds. Honestly, I do believe that there is a lot of power in film. Like even in Orange is the New Black, 13, there's also a whole prison talk on TikTok that showcases gives you a glimpse of what life is like. And also, I think people are slowly starting to, people who've never experienced or been around, I guess like that kind of thing are starting to get a little bit more of a glimpse into how inhumane it really is. Because also during COVID, if you think about it, like that was a time where we were very isolated, and this is only for some people, a few months, for some people years, and that has taken such a big mental toll on us. So then when you think about, oh, okay, if we're already, and we're able to interact with, maybe we're living with family, maybe we're living with ourselves or with our dogs, we were able to at least go out and about a little bit. But like thinking about like people who are in solitary confinement, like, of course, it's going to take a mental toll on anyone. So I think just like having more ways to share, this is the circumstance. Nobody should ever have to be in this circumstance, and we need to have better conditions for, first of all, like not, we need to have better conditions for people who are prisoned, but also obviously change a lot of the laws to ensure that it doesn't happen in the first place.
And I'll just end on the note that in terms of the communal exercise of voting, that a lot of states also have very, very unintelligible legislative language around if you actually have the right to vote after being formally convicted. So if you know someone who is who has a felony or formally convicted, to reach out to them and ask them if they know the status on if they're able to vote or if they're eligible to vote. And if they don't know the language, find that language for them and figure out if they're able to actually vote in your state. So
many states don't actually even have policies articulated on after you've been incarcerated, how do you actually vote? They're not publicly available. So another thing that you can do is push your Secretary of State in your state, as well as whoever, the prisons work differently in states. Some of them have power over this, but whoever is director of prisons, to really publish and make public what these policies or procedures are. And if they don't have the power of your legislator to actually make sure these things are publicly articulable. So a lot of times they don't exist at all. And you can kind of get yourself in a bit of legal liability trying to advise someone on how to vote. Because in states like Florida, you can be liable to go to jail as well for advising someone incorrectly on how to commit a crime.
Which is actually crazy when you say it out loud.
Download myBalbo now on Apple and Google Play stores to watch the full episode of Democracy Downloaded or to start your own roundtable. myBalbo, the home for the next generation of changemakers.